In 1967 at a hotel bar, a pilot named Rollin King reportedly pitched an idea to a friend on a cocktail napkin. King drew a triangle with 3 points: Dallas, Houston, San Antonio. The idea was to fly a low-cost airline between just these cities and beat large airlines with complex routes and bloated costs. The friend, Herb Kelleher, reportedly told King, "Rollin, you're crazy. Let's do it." This is the origin story of Southwest Airlines, now one of the largest airlines in the world. A version of the cocktail napkin is enshrined at Southwest headquarters. But King admitted in 2007 that, like so many origin stories, the cocktail napkin was a myth. Ideas can start on napkins, but real pitches need details, packaged for investors. Today, that's most often in a pitch deck. I've seen over 1,000 pitch decks, but so many make mistakes. I've written a detailed guide to making a pitch deck, but I want to go further with analysis and grading of actual decks. I hope this helps you improve yours. I'm starting with a pitch from Harvest Money, a startup that published a draft of its deck for feedback. I wanted to cover a startup that wasn't well known yet, so we could judge its deck more objectively. I'm grateful to the founders for their transparency. If you'd like to have your pitch deck rated, email me at mark@venturekit.com. Of course, I'll only publish decks with permission. Let's dive into a grading of the pitch deck from Harvest Money. Okay, here's the start of the deck. It has 14 slides, and if you want to see it on SlideShare, you can use this URL. I'll be grading each slide from A to F to give a rough measure of its effectiveness, but I want to stress that the Harvest Money team posted this deck as a draft to get feedback, so I mean any criticism to be constructive. I encourage you to read this deck as a potential investor. What do you think is clear, unclear, exciting, worrying? That's how I'm approaching it. This is the first slide, the title slide. Title slide should briefly say what the company does and make it easy to learn more or follow up. I like title slides that show the company name, logo, and slogan, the CEO's name and email address, a link to the company's website and angel list page, any company's social media handles if they're active, and the current date, which helps me timestamp the company's progress if they send another deck in the future. What I like about the title slide is the short descriptive slogan, and the graphic is nice, though it is a bit cliche. When my last company was fundraising, we used a very similar graphic on our title slide. I think something more unique to financial services or a product screenshot would be better. The weaknesses are that there's no website URL, no social media handles, no contact information. I don't know who the CEO is. This makes it harder to learn more upfront or follow up. The slide does the bare minimum, so I'd grade it as C. I'd like to see this other information added, but the title slide isn't important, so it's not a big deal. This is the team slide. The team slide should convey who the founders are, some key accomplishments, and why the team is uniquely suited for the opportunity. I like that this slide focuses on the founders, which is who investors want to know the most about, but there are some problems. There are no actual titles. It just says business, engineering, and design, which doesn't say who the CEO is because it may not be the business person. There are no accomplishments. I can't get a sense of their personal strengths. They're just logos of past employers, which only really says you passed an admission test into that company. I'd rather see 1 to 3 key accomplishments, ideally related to the startup's market. Overall, I'd grade this slide a D, which may sound harsh, but it just doesn't say much about the strengths of this team. This is the solution slide, which conveys what the product does and its benefits. I like this slide. I think it does a lot well. First, it describes what the product is. It aims to be the first automated and intelligent debt management platform. It says who it's for, the 8 in 10 Americans with debt, and it shows a large image of the current or future product. It also cites its data, which I appreciate, but for a live pitch, citation should move to an appendix because the text would be too small. Overall, I think the slide has no major weaknesses. It does what it's supposed to, so I grade it an A. A small edit is that I would split the 2 sentences into separate paragraphs just to make them pop. This is the Why Now slide, which should explain why the opportunity exists or what changes enable it. There are many possible market enablers. There could be new technology like AI or cheap sensors, social changes like demographics or regulation, competitive forces like fragmented markets or slow incumbents. Good teams know the history of their market and why the right time is now. I like that this slide mentions an important enabler, the growing amount of American debt. It shows both individual and national debt numbers. But this is probably not the only enabler. I'd like to see 1 to 3 more, like greater access to financial datasets or new machine learning algorithms. I'd also rather see the individual debt numbers in this graph instead of national numbers. Harvest is a consumer app, so individual circumstances are what will drive adoption. I would also move this slide to later in the deck, after the problem and solution are fleshed out. It's awkward to describe why something should exist before you fully describe what it is. Overall, I'd give this slide a C. Many teams don't include a Why Now slide, so I'm glad Harvest did, but there should be more enablers listed. This is the problem slide, which describes who the customers are and what pains of theirs are being addressed. Harvest nicely describes the root problem for their users, the debt cycle. People are short on cash, so they go into debt, pay bills and interest with the same income, and get shorter on cash, leading to more debt. Harvest attributes the debt cycle to a lack of financial literacy and poor financial habits, which cues up why the Harvest product can help. I think this is the best slide yet. It's clear, concise, uses graphics well, and sets up the solution slide. I give it an A. This is another solution slide, and it describes how Harvest solves the problems in the previous slide. I really like how Harvest tells the story of turning the vicious debt cycle into a virtuous cycle by automating debt payments and teaching financial literacy. But there's this third feature of continuous fractional refinancing. I have no idea what this means, and neither does Google. A search for that term found only one result on the internet, and it's this deck. That's an impressive feat, but also a sign to use a clearer term. While this graphic makes sense, it's also a bit busy. I'd consider reducing the number of icons or text to focus attention because investors don't spend much time per slide. Overall, I'd give this slide a B. If the jargon and graphic were cleaned up, I'd give it an A. This is the product slide, which covers specific features. I like how Harvest is consistent with its icons and feature descriptions, but I don't think this slide adds much beyond the previous slide. There are only small details added about how Harvest will help users reduce debt or learn good habits. I'd rather see this slide expanded into 3 separate slides that show screenshots and details of each major feature. I'll admit I'm a product-focused investor, but for a consumer app, good product design is so important, so I think it's worth it. I give this slide a C for not adding much, but I think there's good source material to build on. This is a business model slide, which should ideally describe what you sell, who pays you, and how much they pay. Or it can describe unit economics, the cost and revenue of each fundamental unit of your business, which is usually a customer in online startups, but can be a manufactured product like a car. This slide doesn't cover any of that, so it's a bad slide. It spends all this space on the business model of other companies, when the only relevant information is this small bubble saying affiliate revenue. But this doesn't say who the affiliates are, how much they pay, and what they get in return. 2 important metrics for a business model slide are the lifetime value of a customer, the LTV, and the cost of acquisition, the CAC. Investors are looking for an LTV that's higher than the CAC, ideally more than 3x. Because this slide tells so little about the business model, unfortunately I give it an F. It needs to tell a lot more about how the business will be profitable. This is another business model slide, which explains how Harvest will aggregate users to create value. Like the last slide, it doesn't say anything about the economics of the business. It says Harvest will try to align with users, but honestly that sounds trite. It wants to get lenders to compete, but we still don't know how much Harvest will charge or spend to acquire users. Investors understand that aggregating users creates opportunities, so I think this slide is unnecessary and give it an F. The business model slides of this deck need to be revamped. This is a slide on the go-to-market strategy, which is not a common slide, but good if it explains the initial customers and how they'll be acquired. Unfortunately, this slide is all over the place. It covers millennials, mortgages, lenders, influencers, and users of a closed competitor. This is shotgun strategy, trying to do too many things at once. I also don't like the use of media articles. You can find an online article that supports almost anything, so it's not meaningful. Because this slide has the kernel of some good ideas, I'll give it a D, but I'd rather see descriptions of 1 to 3 initial customer segments and how they'll be reached. This is the vision slide, sometimes called a mission slide. It can describe your motivation, value proposition, or the long-term result you want to create. I have no idea what's going on here. There are 4 copies of the Harvest logo, arrows streaming across the page, and groups of disconnected competitor logos. It's a hot mess. Because a mission or vision can be so grand, it should be crystal clear. This was Mixpanel's mission slide when it raised $65 million from top investors. It simply says, help the world learn from its data. Unfortunately, Harvest's vision slide is the worst in the deck, and I give it an F. Because Harvest nicely described its goal at the beginning, I don't think a mission slide is necessary, but I believe the founders could make a decent one quickly if they keep it simple. This is the competition slide, which should describe your competitors and your advantages over them. Harvest shows their competitors in a petal diagram, which was pioneered by Steve Blank. It's used when a company is creating a new market with no direct competitors and only has indirect competitors, which are shown in each petal. But new markets are rare. Many startups are entering existing markets and shouldn't be using the petal diagram. Even then, the petal doesn't describe the company's advantages. From what I can tell, Harvest isn't creating a new market. It's entering the consumer debt management market and has a few direct competitors like Tally and Debt-Free. I'd rather learn more about advantages of Harvest, which seem to be automation, education, and ease of use. Harvest could show those in a 2x2 grid or a matrix. Also, Harvest says they aren't aiming to be a Swiss Army knife, but then show themselves at the center of 5 different markets, implying they have features of each. This is a conflicting message. Finally, I'd want to see why Harvest will be defensible. Does it have switching costs that make it hard for users to leave? Or network effects that make the service more valuable as more people use it? Including all this would likely take 2 slides, but I think they'd be worth it. As is, I give this slide a D. It shows a bunch of competitors, but doesn't say anything about how Harvest will compete or defend itself. This slide shows Harvest's timeline, which combines information usually seen on slides for traction and financials. I appreciate that the team tried to be efficient with space, but this slide makes my head hurt. It's trying to combine burn rate, cash on hand, headcount, and launch dates into one overwhelming graph. Each of these should just be described as single numbers. Also, what Harvest has done is not as important as where it wants to be. I'd rather see a timeline that starts at today, then projects milestones for the next 12 to 18 months in important areas like product features or revenue. The one thing I'd want to see bar graphs for is traction, like monthly active users and retention rate by cohort, but there's no data on that, which is a red flag. Overall, I'd rate this slide a D. It should be separated into slides for traction and financials that more clearly describe where the company is and what it wants to achieve. This is the last slide, a use of funds slide, which should describe how much funding you're raising and what you'll use it for. Harvest slide does list some reasonable goals, like who it wants to hire and how many customers it wants to acquire, but some important information is missing. How much Harvest wants to raise, who has invested to date, how funding will be allocated, and when goals are projected to be met. Harvest says it will build lending and channel partnerships, but I'd like to see how many it's targeting. Does it consider 2, 10, or 20 successful? It would just be an estimate, of course, but good managers are specific. The design here is also too basic. Slides don't need to be flashy, but they should be clear. A visual timeline of projections or a pie chart showing how funds will be used would be clearer than bullet points. I give this slide a C for having some relevant points, but it should be more specific with a cleaner design. That was Harvest's last slide, but I think the deck is missing several sections that would have been helpful. These are the missing slides from most to least important. First, there's no marketing plan. Other than mentioning a few customer segments, there were no description of channels that Harvest will use or economics for user acquisition. This is the biggest omission in the deck. Competition for consumers is so fierce that marketing is increasingly the biggest challenge startups face, bigger than raising money or building a product. Don't fall for a field of dreams strategy, the idea that if you build it, users will come. There's no traction slide. Despite a public launch, there's no mention of user numbers, app ratings, or retention. This is always a red flag. There's no market slide, no bottom-up analysis of how big the market is. I believe it's big enough for venture capital, but I'd like to see numbers. Marketing, traction, and market are essential slides, so each of these get a grade of I for incomplete. There are 3 more sections that are not essential, but would have been nice. I like to see financial projections. They're only in about half of pitch decks, but high-level projections of costs, revenue, and headcount show discipline and help me gauge if the team is realistic. I like a summary slide that summarizes the pitch and redisplays contact information from the title slide. This isn't a big deal, but it's a smoother, more actionable end to a deck. I also like an appendix with citations or resources to learn more. It helps show your story is factual. Overall, here are the grades for each slide of the deck. Averaging these together, the Harvest Money deck comes in at a C-. It has some good slides and a nice design, but there's still a lot of information missing. But I want to stress again that this was a public draft. Most pitch decks suck at the beginning, and I respect the Harvest founders for improving theirs faster with feedback. If I had been pitched this deck, I still would have taken the meeting. It's interesting enough to learn more in person, which ultimately is the goal of a deck sent online. It looks like other investors agreed because Harvest eventually raised $1 million in seed funding. Unfortunately, it looks like Harvest didn't make it, and the founders moved on. It's too bad because I like the idea, and I appreciate how the founders tried to pitch it. If you're fundraising for a startup like Harvest, email me at mark@venturekit.com. If you'd like your pitch deck rated, also email me. It might feel scary to make your pitch deck public, but I think most startups that do find it helps. It's very rare for ideas to be stolen, and competitors tend to stay focused on their own strategy. The number of people who are willing and able to compete with you is much smaller than the number who are willing and able to help. If you'd like to see future videos from VentureKit, please subscribe on YouTube. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.